The Open Banking Initiative aims to use innovation through collaboration between fintechs, banks and retailers to deepen financial and social inclusion in Nigeria. CNBC Africa's Kenneth Igbomor caught up with Carlos Figueredo, founder and CEO of Open Vector, to get more insight on the Open Banking Initiative.
We came with the Lord Mayor's delegation to promote UK export. So we had a chance to meet with the Vice President of Nigeria, with key ministers, include the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Trade, the CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria's board. We met also with the Nigerian Stock Exchange and also the banks and the fintech community.
So you're meeting the key players in the industry. What sort of collaborations do you see coming out of these meetings?
Oh, it's very important. The collaboration, what we realized with Nigeria is that there's an openness to want to embrace innovation, to want to embrace change, to want to embrace technology in order to be able to affect and help social and financial inclusion. So very excited.
When you look at the fintech space in Nigeria, the entire ecosystem, how ripe do you think this is, or how ripe do you think this is for new innovations to help leapfrog some of the, especially in financial services?
I was very impressed with the fintech community. We had a meeting yesterday with the Lord Mayor and the delegation together with the fintech community, where they did a presentation about different programs and initiatives that they're doing here, primarily around various types of payments and mobile payments, et cetera. And we were very impressed with how much the fintech community is moving here in Nigeria. So if anything, it shows great stride.
So I hear you're doing something called the open banking. Can you just kindly shed more light on that and let me get a sense of what that is?
Open banking was initiated in the UK. It was the first initiative globally. It's intended to provide a level playing field for all banks. But what it does, it also brings in the collaboration of the fintechs to work with banks in ways that that's never happened before. But most importantly, it has a very strong overarching legal and regulatory aspect. So what that does is that when you combine those things, they're incredibly powerful. It means that new products and services will be created to benefit us, the consumers. For countries like Nigeria and everywhere else in the world, they are realizing the power of this initiative. It's being embraced by many countries. And the purpose, especially with a country like Nigeria, is to help with social and financial inclusion again. It's to look at how these new products and services that would otherwise not have been created without open banking, we can now serve and look ways of changing the market, changing the way banks behave, or not behave from a purely behavioral perspective, but about how they communicate, provide products and services to try to satisfy the unbanked, to look at new ways to provide products and services that can help other communities, especially people in the north, look at ways to reach out to people that need other services.
So would I be right to say that the Open Banking Initiative is one way of getting a mutually beneficial relationship between the banks and the fintech companies?
Absolutely. It's very, very key. And what it also does is, because there is a strong legal and regulatory aspect, it provides the central bank and the government with a bit of a comfort, knowing that everything, not only open banking, but covering other things like cryptocurrencies or other innovation like this, are covered by a strong regulatory and legal framework.
When you look at the financial services space, we've seen it's home to a lot of disruption in the sector.
Yes.
And when you're talking to regulators, how fast do you think they can meet this pace of change that's happening in that space? With the appropriate regulatory frameworks to guide these new initiatives that are coming up?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So I think it's very, very important that we do two key things. That we help the fintech community by showing them that there is a space for them to innovate and to work with the likes of financial institutions. But at the same time, we need to first ensure that there's a very strong legal and regulatory aspect that's broad enough but solid enough to do a couple of different things. To protect the banks from the fintechs, to protect the fintechs from the banks, to protect the consumer most importantly, but also to give peace of mind, again, to the regulators that there is a broad enough and a solid enough legal structure to allow for that innovation to grow and to progress.
When you speak to the banks, what kind of reception are you getting from the banks, regarding this initiative?
Yeah, of course. I think the banks, I was very surprised here in Nigeria with the willingness to listen, the willingness to explore the opportunity. I completely understand the apprehensiveness of the banks. We received that same element in the UK, but I think they all quickly realized that banks need to innovate. They need to change. They need to look at different ways through this innovation and technology to work closer with fintechs to reach out to consumers in a different way. Consumers are not, banking clients are not the same banking clients as before. They're now much more digital, and they require digital products and services.
I would like you to give me just a sense of some of the innovative product in the pipeline and how you think they can better serve the consumers.
Absolutely. If we look at some of the opportunities that open banking can bring, there are very simple things from account aggregation to being able to find new ways and new products and services to change the way we do banking today. What that means is that through these new banking products and services, we can reach out to individuals that would otherwise be considered not bankable. And again, we have a good example of how the telecoms, the mobile payments have reached out and have been embraced and used by different kinds of financial sectors or different community or population because of that innovation. So I think that is where we are keen to look at working with banks to create those products and services.
So looking at that, I well assume that big data,
yes,
it's a part of what you do, what you're doing with these initiatives. I'd like you to speak to the role of that in
Absolutely.
what you're doing.
So it's not something that I've invented, but data is the new oil. Data is incredibly important. So what we do with open banking is by allowing for this standardization of this data, for this data to become available now to the community. It allows for the fintechs to take that data, which is now, again, in a standardized format, and be able to create all sorts of products and services that we otherwise would not have been able to do before. So using big data is incredibly relevant to the future of innovation.
At least the analytics will help you understand the consumers even more and how you're making the choices, right?
Absolutely. As we move forward into future elements of AI and whatnot, it is very important to consider the importance of big data.
And now I want you to speak to this other end. Yes, these are new innovations coming up, and then we also know that there are challenges associated with innovation. Cyber threats, for example. I'm talking like unforeseen risks, and when you look at that landscape and you see how this innovation is shaping up, where do you see these challenges, and how are you working to resolve some of these challenges? Absolutely.
I think it's not only myself. I think the community in itself is asking for this protection of how do we protect the consumer, how do we protect the data, how do we protect the payments or whatever it is that we're trying to use through this innovation. I think a key element that we've learned, at least as we implemented these changes in Europe, was to ensure that we had key regulatory aspects like GSTP, or GDPR, excuse me, and PSD2 were very, very important in this role. So I think we need to adapt those same measures of like GDPR and PSD2 to this initiative. Talk to me about the application programming interfaces. I know you had the API standards worked with you partnered with another firm. Yes. Can you speak to me on that one and let me know what? Yes, we're very excited about being a key partner for the Open Banking Initiative here in Nigeria. It is, again, if the community seems to continue to embrace this initiative, if we get the support from the regulators and from the banks here in Nigeria, the potential is that Nigeria could become the first country in Africa to embrace open banking. What that does is, again, as I relate to the APIs, is that this data that would be collected or standardized and provided to the fintechs, we would use an API as a means of transport to be able to get this data through APIs to be able to create then those platforms and products. So very, very exciting. But I still see other traditional challenges that are there, like fraud. Yes. And how with these new standards and with the initiative coming up, how do you think this can be checked? There's a change in mentality that has to occur. We have been told for many years to not share data. And now with this open banking initiative, we're doing the opposite. We're asking people to share their data. But there are key security aspects to this, like GDPR, that provides people with consent. And that's very important. This initiative will give the consumer back the power of their own data. So while the information or the data will be shared, it is up to the consumer to control how that data is shared, to what level their data will be consumed, and how it's to be used. So it's very important for the consumer to understand that this innovation brings also a very strong set of security. And also, very importantly, is that through these new regulations and legal aspects, there is I'll call it a security net around that to ensure that the consumer is protected.
So I'd like you to speak to the adoption trends you saw when you launched this initiative in the UK and other parts in Europe, and how do you see that playing out here in Nigeria when it finally kicks off?
Yes, that's a great question. So there's a difference between how it was embraced in the UK and in Europe compared to what we're seeing in Central America, South America, in Africa. In the UK, we have to remember it was the first initiative. It had some struggles at the beginning because we didn't have a template from anyone else. So obviously the take-up of this initiative was a bit more challenging, a bit more difficult. But as we are looking at other countries and regions are realizing the opportunity, the benefits of this initiative, and most importantly, how this will have an effect on social and financial inclusion. And that's something that wasn't necessarily the main objective at the time in the UK. There was a different purpose that was initially the target of what open banking meant in the UK. So as I look at it from an African from the region of Africa, there is this huge potential to bring innovation and this new aspect of social and financial inclusion that will change how this region works. So we look at open banking from what we could do in Nigeria, but in our conversations with other countries within Africa that are looking at open banking and talking to us about it, we're looking at a much bigger picture of an open data, which means a harmonization of the region, of the entire African region, to benefit anything from cross-border payments or to help in all kinds of aspects of innovation. But once again, if Nigeria was to embrace this, Nigeria could potentially become a hub in Africa for innovation and open banking, which would lead to the use of fintech and the banks themselves here in Nigeria across the region, creating more jobs, helping with other aspects of the economy.
That was Carlos Figueredo, founder and CEO of the Open Vector.